Why are COVID rates increasing? And why is bird flu in the news? Could it be the upcoming presidential election? Stay tuned for our take on this. Welcome to the Chaplain's Corner After Hours, a place to discuss world events which impact our Christian walk and our spiritual journey, and where sometimes these discussions have sharp edges. Hello, and welcome to the Chaplain's Corner After Hours. I'm your host, Chaplain Warren, and we've got several great stories lined up for today, so let's jump right into the first one. Our lead story comes from 1819 News. Fall bird flu pandemic may be used to manipulate presidential election voting procedures. This comes from U.S. Senator Tommy Tuberville, Republican, Auburn, Alabama, and he expressed his concern that Democrats will try to use a predicted pandemic to change voting procedures in the same way they were done in 2020. According to the state's senior U.S. Senator, Centers for Disease Control and Prevention Director Mandy Cohen is forecasting a bird flu pandemic in the fall. During an interview with Mobile Radio FM Talk 106.5 on the Jeff Poors Show, Senator Tuberville said, "I met with the CDC director about 3 or 4 weeks ago. She took Fauci's place, and she foresees a pandemic coming in the fall. She told me this probably around September, a bird flu." Senator Tuberville went on to say, "They'll put all kinds of things out there, regulations where you can vote from all kinds of different places." He added, "I see everything shaping up the way it did last time because they know they have to manipulate what's going on to get her, Kamala Harris, elected. And they know if they can do it, our country will never be the same." Well, please stay tuned for our editorial segment after the end of this story segment, because this is exactly what we're going to talk about. And now let's see what else is on the chaplain's radar screen. Story 2 for today. 13 things to know about J.D. Vance's Catholic journey. And this comes from the Catholic News Agency. Republican vice presidential nominee J.D. Vance is one of the most overtly religious major politicians in America. Vance has written extensively about his life and faith, both in a mega-selling memoir and in a long essay that describes how a drug-using teenager with anger problems, family problems, school problems, and doubts about God became an accomplished, successful family man excited about being a Catholic. The 13 items about his meandering journey to Rome and the aftermath are drawn largely from his 3 million copy selling 2016 memoir, Hillbilly Elegy, and a nearly 7,000 word essay he wrote about his conversion for the Easter 2020 issue of The Lamp, which is a Catholic magazine. We won't list the 13 reasons here, but the key things to know are that he did not go to church as a child, and his initial religious affiliations were Protestant and Pentecostal. In the end, it was his girlfriend and wife-to-be, Usha, who led him to Roman Catholicism. Vance said, "The sad fact is I couldn't do it without Usha. Usha is the daughter of immigrants from India and a Hindu. Vance felt hesitant about joining the Catholic Church because he wasn't a Catholic when they got married. But from the beginning, she supported my decision." What Vance calls a few informal conversations with a couple of Dominican friars led to a period of serious study of Catholicism. Vance was baptized in August 2019 by a Dominican priest, Father Henry Stephen, at St. Gertrude Priory, which is attached to a Dominican parish in Cincinnati, where Vance now lives. And so, where is J.D. Vance in his faith today? Well, Vance says practicing his Catholic faith has helped him increase his patience, curb his temper, forgive more easily, and choose his family over his career. Okay, also on the Chaplain's radar screen for today is story number 3. A family sues to regain custody of autistic son from transgenderism activists. This story comes from Breitbart.com. A family from Maryland who lost custody of their special needs son after refusing to let him undergo an apparent sex change is reportedly suing Children's National Hospital in Washington, D.C. The young man's parents, who are Army veterans, said the 16-year-old never wanted to be a girl until he was hospitalized in 2021 for hurting himself because he had just broken up with his girlfriend and was deeply upset about it. In their suit, the parents have accused the hospital of starting a full-on campaign to transgender this child and accused staff of mentally reprogramming, saying their son has been forced to write letters to friends disavowing his previous male identity. In an interesting twist on this, a D.C. Republican Party committee member, Carl Van Batten, is supporting the family's legal battle because his son is also autistic, and Van Batten does not want the same thing to happen to his child. The lawsuit adds another bizarre twist to this story. The suit adds that since being removed from the care of his parents, the youngster has appeared in provocative and sexually suggestive poses on Instagram. You may recall we reported earlier this year on a similar story from parents in Indiana. And as we've seen over and over, not only is the family unit under attack by transgenderism activists, but basic common parental rights are also under attack also. And now, for our good news story of the day, story number 4. This comes from the National Catholic Register. A Catholic astronaut says, Jesus was with me in space. Catholic astronaut Mike Hopkins spoke on the last day of the National Eucharistic Congress. The theme for Day 5 of the Congress was To the Ends of the Earth. The National Eucharistic Congress was a pilgrimage and gathering of Roman Catholics all across America in a type of revival of devotion towards Eucharistic worship. In an interview with NCR, he talked about his experience of receiving the Eucharist in space. Hopkins spent 6 months on the International Space Station in 2013. And though he was thrilled when he was chosen for a space mission, there was one person he didn't want to leave behind, and that was Jesus in the Eucharist. Facing the prospect of being off the planet for half a year, he decided he had to find out if Jesus could travel with him. It turns out he could, and he did. After a long personal journey, Hopkins was confirmed in the Catholic Church in December 2012, and he was launching into space in December 2013. As the date loomed closer, he started asking the question, is there any chance I can take the Eucharist up with me into space? Well, long story short, after a lot of administrative inquiries, he says, I was able to take a small pyx, that's a special container for communion wafers. I was able to take a small pyx up with me that had 6 wafers divided into 4 each. So I had 24 opportunities to receive communion. In the full story, which we recommend looking at, Hopkins talks about how the doors opened for him to receive communion in space and how that truly served to deepen his faith. Okay, folks, that's all of our stories for this episode. Please stay tuned after a brief message for our editorial segment about the bird flu. Are you a successful business owner looking to improve profitability? Antimo Pricing Management has led business owners to greater profitability for over 20 years by focusing on custom pricing strategies that put more money on your bottom line. Click our link in the show notes to see how we can help you have a more profitable future. And now for our editorial segment, let's head down into the Chaplain's secret secure bunker, hidden deep beneath the rolling hills and the fruited plains of America. Are all doors secure?
Yes, sir, and perimeter security is activated.
Be sure and put a face mask on Eddie the guard dog. We're going to be talking about the newest election year virus. Well, hello and welcome back to our editorial segment. Lots of wildly unpredictable things have happened already in this crazy 2024 election year, including a highly predictable assassination attempt on President Trump. But now, another predicted event is making its appearance on the election year stage. The new and improved election year virus. The bird flu pandemic. So let's take a look at a little history on this subject. Way back on January 20th, 2020, the CDC announced the first confirmed case of COVID-19 in the U.S. Businesses were shut down. Churches were shut down. Relatives could not visit family members in nursing homes. People could not have parties in Michigan or even leave their homes in many cases. Masking rules went into effect. Mandatory vaccinations went into effect. Social distancing was enforced. And a mom was arrested and prosecuted for, oh, get this, letting her children play outside in Idaho. Hospitals were claiming dire, overwhelming patient loads, while emergency facilities set up by the federal government went virtually unused. Yet in the midst of this most dire crisis in history, on June 24th, 2020, the CDC announced no spike in COVID-19 infections despite massive Black Lives Matter riots in over 300 cities after the George Floyd outrage. Isn't that interesting? Going to church was labeled a COVID-19 death sentence, but the virus was powerless against rioters. Well, mostly peaceful rioters, that is. For the 2020 election, an analysis of mail-in voter fraud concluded that possibly 28% of voters using mail-in ballots committed fraud in their use of those ballots. You know, like filling out multiple ballots, making sure dead people voted Democrat. And we'll link this study in our story notes. That those ballots were generally counted after in-person ballots suggests that the fraudulent ballots plus computer-generated ballots contributed to the late surge for Joe Biden in the early hours of the day after in-person voting finished. We recount this short history of 2020 because the CDC, under the direction of Fauci replacement Mandy Cohen, is starting the rollout of a new pandemic for 2024, just in time for the election. Now you may ask, who is Mandy Cohen? Well, I urge you to take a guess. Yes, she's a leftist for sure, because she was the founding member of the grassroots organization Doctors for Obama, way back when Obamacare was coming out. And that organization was later named Doctors for America. Need I say more? The New York Times in particular, and Nature magazine, are running breathless articles explaining how bird flu can become a full-fledged pandemic this fall. It seems to be no coincidence that these articles started appearing in June and July, just as the Trump campaign started to surge in public polls about the election in November. Given the current apparent chaos in the Democrat Party, We can probably expect to see even more of these articles heading into September before early voting starts. So, given our fresh memories of the COVID-19 pandemic, what might we see in 2024? Will totalitarian population control be reinstated? Will businesses be closed down? Will schools be closed down? And will churches be strong-armed to close down? You know, if someone had asked these types of questions in late 2019, that person would have been labeled as an idiot or a nutcase for saying such things. And yet each and every one of them came true. It's not a partisan statement to say a significant part of the population wants Donald Trump kept out of the White House at all costs. And I emphasize all, because we saw on July 13 how far that sentiment extends. Predictably, the media, which saw no fraud in 2020, has seen no fraud in the Biden-Harris administration, will be equally blind and clueless for the 2024 election. So where does the earthly body of Christ go from here? Well, for starters, if you're planning to vote Democrat or know someone who is, I would sincerely ask you to pray about that. Because is it that you hate Donald Trump? Is it that you support abortion, euthanasia, transgender mutilation of children, and all the other leftist issues? The next thing we could do is pray for the church. Much of the church is taking a blind eye to the election and, more importantly, the issues. And they're doing it on purpose. The book of Revelation, chapter 3, 14 through 22, condemns that toothless type of pious pose when it talks about the church of Laodicea. And then much of the church has cozied up to the LGBTQXYZ123+ agenda in the name of inclusiveness and not wanting to be mean. Well, Matthew chapter 5, verse 13 has some stern words to say about that. What do you do when salt has lost its saltiness? More to the point, what can or should Christians do to prepare if another pandemic is unleashed this fall? Well, first of all, I hope you are in a church or can find a church that will resolve not to shut down just because the government tells it to. Failing that, find a Bible study or Bible fellowship group that will resolve to continue meeting when the rest of the country begins shutting down. Or consider forming a home church. A home church is a place for worshiping in community, much as the early churches described in the Acts of the Apostles. A home church can provide mutual support for members who need help. And a home church makes its decisions as they best fit the group that forms the church. No hierarchy of leaders in far-off places, no institutional rules. We will put a link in our show notes to a YouTube channel that talks about home churches. Finally, be firm in the conviction that all the dysfunctional fighting in Washington, D.C. is not reality. Turn it off and turn to God. Given all the dysfunction in the church and the world, it is tempting to fall into a sense of despair. But Jesus does not want us to do that. I am reminded of a story I read recently about Gregory of Nazianzus, one of the early church fathers and a bishop of Constantinople in the 4th century. Rome was falling to the pagans. The Arian heresy was tearing Christianity apart. Gregory had serious health issues, and several members of his family had recently died. And so Gregory wrote a letter to a friend telling of his despair. He said his despair felt like being at sea, with all the storms and the winds swirling around, and with no light for guidance. And in all of that, it seemed like Christ was asleep. Yet we know from Mark chapter 4, verse 38, that we can summon Jesus in faith and belief, and he can rebuke the storms and the seas. Gregory went on to thoroughly defeat the Arians and save the early Christian church from schism. So let's pray in faith and belief to Jesus about our concerns. Let us spend more time in the Word than we do on our devices. Let the Word be our spiritual rest. And may God bless us and bless America. Program notes for this episode can be found on the Chaplain's Corner After Hours YouTube channel. You can leave your comments on the Chaplain's Corner After Hours YouTube channel, Facebook, Rumble, or on X, formerly Twitter. Until next time, just remember, God's in charge, and we know how the story ends.